This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a really great episode coming up. But first, I want to take a minute to say thank you so much for each and every one of you for listening to this podcast. Thank you for your likes. Thank you for your comments. And thank you so much for subscribing. This podcast is new, and I just really am grateful for all of you. And hopefully you'll give this episode a thumbs up. We took the highlights from our first 10 guests and put them all in one place.
So when I saw this light, and it was just a pinprick at first, and I felt like I was moving toward it. It was moving toward me. I'm not really sure, but as I got closer, it looked like it was millions upon millions of fragments of light, all in unison. They were all like of one mind, a single mind. And so kind of like if you see a school of sardines, you know, how they all swim together and the light refracts off them, and you see all these multiple colors of light and everything. It was very much like that, only infinite. Was huge, and to tell you the truth, I was in kind of gaga awe of this whole experience, and so as I kept getting closer and closer, I started feeling these waves of love, and just like a warm embrace. And I'd grown up in a really dysfunctional childhood, and so this feeling of being enveloped and warmly embraced, lovingly, was kind of foreign, and but very welcome. And then 3 of the fragments broke away, and they came toward me, and they were welcoming me. And it wasn't a communication that was like you and I are talking right now. It was more of an understanding, a knowing that was deep within my being that I'm being welcomed home.
So where I ended up on the other side of that light is what is called the Orientation Center. And that's where my whole experience started. The very first thing, I was in this building, and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. My first thought was, how is the hospital this large? Because it was this corridor building, and it was made of beautiful white polished marble, absolutely the most beautiful marble I had ever seen. On the right-hand side of me were these columns, beautiful, tall, white marble, maybe 30 feet high, and they went down about 6 feet apart as far as I could see. There was just no end to this building. In the middle of the corridor were these tables, square tables with, again, they were made of marble, and there were marble benches on the 4 sides of the table. And again, all the way down as far as I could see, and there were 2 people sitting at each one of these tables. On the left-hand side, right corresponding to these tables, maybe about 4 or 5 feet away, were these tunnels. And they looked like they had been cut out of the marble. Just perfect white marble, 90-degree angle like a doorway.
When all of a sudden, I left my body, this strange feeling of leaving my body. So it felt like there was a saran wrap, kind of a very thin veil. It actually felt like I'm going through this veil. And what I'm about to explain is there's no concepts here for what really happened to me over there. So I'm going to use vocabulary and concepts to the best of my ability. So the first thing was, there's no time over here. I'm in eternity. This is very strange. I never thought that would happen. I never thought that a human being could know the difference between time and eternity. And the sensation is I don't have a body and I'm dead, but if I'm going to describe it as if I have a body. And it felt like all the cells in my body, the trillions of cells, they felt like they were all giggling. I don't know. It's just the weirdest thing. And they're vibrating, and I'm going, what are you guys doing? So I'm kind of looking down, but I obviously I don't have eyes. I can't see. I don't have a body. But I'm looking down, and I'm going, what are you guys doing? And they're like, he's coming. And I don't know what they're saying. It's happening so fast. And I feel like I was looking at the edge of the earth, and as if somebody was going to come up. And I realized then that it was the creator of the universe. And I was just blown away. I'm like, now I knew why all my cells were excited. Oh my God. And I started looking back down to earth, what I thought was earth. And I started turning my head like, oh man, are those guys going to be okay with me being dead? It just was a concern for my family when I heard, and you don't hear like with hearing, it's more like telepathy, and it's more like you get a package of information in your brain, and it unpacks. And I heard, don't be afraid. And so Heather, it's happening like this. I'm looking back, and I hear, don't be afraid. And I turn back, and then it's like everything on earth disappeared, or I didn't have a concern about that anymore. And it feels like I'm flying, or I'm moving up toward to now have a visit with the creator of the universe. And I'm just like, oh my God. And the feeling was just remarkable. And so what began happening was there was telepathic messages coming into my head that felt like this way, and love being shot through my body this way. And it was bliss. It was this love of like safety and security and being hugged. And the creator of the universe was, I sensed, it seemed like it was a big electrical, it felt very electric. And it felt like I got to go up to Alaska and to be around the Aurora Borealis. So it felt like that. It felt like this big wave of energy and then the universes started opening up. I mean, it was just like this expanse of forever. And then the creator of the universe started talking to me. And I used the pronoun he, but it's not a he, she. It's the creator of the universe. And I know everybody's got a big deal with pronouns, but that's the best way that I can describe who I'm talking to. And the telepathy is immediate. So as I started thinking it, I could hear God, and I say God, so creator of the universe, God, saying to me, I'm saying, you are the creator of the universe. And he says, I am the creator of the universe. I mean, who would have, how do you have that conversation? How do you do that? So I was like, wow. I go, you know everything. And he's like, at the same time, I mean, as I'm having this thought, the thought's like coming back to me. And it was like, I am the creator of the universe. I go, you know everything. And he goes, I know everything. And he says to me, and I say he, again, you guys know that what I mean by that. He says, I even know the number of grains of sand on a beach in New Zealand. And I go rocketing down to this beach in New Zealand. I feel like my eye is up against this grain of sand. And I immediately knew the number of grains of sand on this beach. And I'm like, oh my God. And I go rocketing back up to be in his presence. And all kinds of things began happening then. I knew the name that he called me, not Donna, but my name that he uses for me. And everybody wants to know that name. And I'm not going to tell the name because it's so sacred. I mean, there's things that people have to understand about sacredness. And so we're having this conversation, and I started getting revealed to me all kinds of things about how things work. And I'm just like, oh my, this is just, unbelievable. The knowledge, the love, the care, and there was no time.
I started to feel this unbelievable lightness that I had never, ever experienced before. I was still fully aware, maybe even more aware than ever, but without the body. And we're always carrying around this body with us, and we don't think twice about it because we're so used to it. But suddenly I was without, 150, 170, whatever pounds that I had to deal with. And it felt so freeing. And if you ever have had, a really vivid dream and you wake up and you remember all the details and it was very real, you also know that you didn't really have a body in that dream. But it was so much different than a dream, because in a dream, it's, it's kind of fuzzy. It's kind of like filmy. But this was the opposite. It was way more crisp and way more clear. And it seemed way more authentic than any dream. And also it seemed like everything was more real than anything on earth.
I saw a beautiful star forming region that had the clouds of reddish pink to white, and then it's dark blue, light blue to white, and then it's white clouds, and it was just beautiful, and the colors were just extremely vivid. And then inside of those clouds, you see the beginning of the forming of stars. Like it was like baby stars, and that was kind of the thought I had. Like, it was like baby stars.
The next thing I know, Heather, I am like floating through outer space. I am feeling chilled. It is beautiful. It's almost like a hallway with and people talk about the light. There wasn't like a beam or a pin. It was just a brightness, and I was just floating towards it. It felt wonderful. At this point, I had no concept, no recollection, awareness at all that I'd been in pain, that I was in an ambulance, that I had gone through all this. It was, and I've said this many times, it was like changing the channel on a remote control. I'm there in one moment, the next moment, this is my new reality, and no connection to what came before it. This was it. And as I start floating, it's sort of a purple darkness that is encompassing me. And I've heard other people talk about it, sort of womb-like, if you will. And as I'm floating up, I see these amazing multicolored sort of images. And I watched Dave Bennett's talk, and he talked about crystal light partitions. For me, these were these images that were like multi-bright, intense colors, but it was like light and smoke mixed together, and they had like tendrils almost. And there's an artist that does fractal artwork, and it was the closest I've come to finding something that looks like what these quote entities were. And there was one in the front and several behind, and I'm drifting up to them and they're drifting to me. And the one in the front is getting closer and closer. And as I was filled with emotion, but at the same time, this was so familiar to me, and it was like familiar and comfortable. And the one in front, there's like this smoke that's coming out and starts to wrap around my neck like this and starts to pour into me. The second it does, I know it's my maternal grandmother.
And the next second I was up on the ceiling, and it felt like the ceiling was against the back of my head. I was looking straight down at the table, at my body. And I didn't feel panicked or anything that I had felt in my body was gone. I felt wrapped in a warm blanket, loved, accepted. I felt so incredible. It was beautiful. And I looked down and very calmly said, if I'm up here and my body's down there and he's calling code blue, I think I just died. And it wasn't any panic whatsoever. The second that I said that, I realized there was someone next to me on my left side. And I didn't ever look to see if there was any vision or any shape or light or anything like that. I knew who that was. internally, I felt connected to whoever that was prior to my whole entire life. I felt like it was what you would say God was. So I wasn't at all scared. I felt this beautiful connection, and I began talking to him through my thoughts.
I felt extremely surrounded by what I call the presence. That's the best word I've come up with, because I feel like there wasn't a word. It wasn't as though I was in the presence of one other being. It was as though I was in the presence of many, many, many beings that exist outside of time and space, that exist outside of the body. And my sense was that it was the all, divinity, all of the highest exalted divine spirits of people who had ever lived, angels, healthy and well ancestors, other divine beings. It just seemed like I was being surrounded by almost like a choir of that just seemed to go on and on and on. And at first it was like, whoa, what is this? But then it started to feel very, very familiar. And once I had, in a few seconds, I guess, but once I had adjusted to where I was, there was this real welcoming feeling, this real familiarity, as though I felt that I had come and gone through this dimension many times.
Up ahead, I could see a light at the end of this black tunnel. And as I approached the light, I was looking down on fields of flowers and just a beautiful scene, like like you couldn't really create even in a movie. And these flowers some of them were really huge. I don't really know how big, but they appeared could be 50 feet or they could be 30 feet big. And they were all making music, or at least I feel like the music came from them, but the music was saturating the air, and it was inside of me as well as inside of them. And somehow we were communicating. And by that, I don't mean specifics. I wasn't asking questions, but it felt like those flowers were actually there to support me, literally. And as I moved forward, there appeared these presences of light, and they had a vague shape of bodies, but they weren't clearly defined. I could not see their features. And when I got to them, they made it clear to me that I was going to meet a being of a high order. Now, the reason I phrase it that way is maybe I need to give a little background. I was raised non-religiously, which wasn't not anti-religiously. I just wasn't raised in a religion. And at that point in my life, I was probably agnostic or atheistic. I probably didn't believe in God. Well, I'm pretty sure I didn't believe in God. But they told me I was meeting this being of a high order, and this being came forward from way off in the distance. It was a little tiny speck of light, and it got brighter and brighter until it was hovering. Well, I feel like it was hovering, or he was hovering. It felt like a male presence. And again, not clearly defined, but a brilliant light. And as he came near me, it wrapped me in this sort of warmth and comfort and acceptance, which is really hard to explain here on earth. But it was like unconditional acceptance, unconditional love. That's the only way I can put it. No questions asked. There were no qualifiers. It was simply acceptance. And I could feel this joy within me. And I could also feel the joy within him. And he was, the best way I could describe it is being a father. If you had a little baby and the baby was maybe trying to learn to walk and fell down a little and started laughing. This is how this presence treated me, like I was like a baby, really. He found a lot of humor in my excitement.
I was amazed by everything, like a child And everything made me say like, wow, what is that? Wow. And immediately once I saw something in the space between me and that thing disappeared, I understood what it was. In that space, I knew what it was. So it was like an instant kind of understanding of everything. It's like immediately after, wow, what is that? It was instant integration. There was no time between the and the instant integration and knowing what it is, And it felt like just a beautiful opportunity to just travel through space and learn everything about what was happening in space and in different systems.
But in that moment, light came. And it's difficult to describe, but it felt as if light came to me, like light came and encircled me. It was comforting me in this hysteria, this horrible trauma of what had happened. It felt as if I was rising above the accident scene. And suddenly I was okay. It's like, oh, I can breathe. I'm not in pain. And I was confused. I'm like, how am I okay? And as I was coming to terms with, wow, I'm really okay, Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she was there in this light with me. And she was gorgeous. She was radiant.
But here, these light beings, and I also recognized I had transitioned into a light being, that these beings, and eventually there were a dozen of them, that they were family. And a family I wasn't even aware of, that were there and they were supporting me and loving me. And we went into the light to this one area that felt very spherical, like a giant bubble. And we all went into this, and I started to re-experience my life.
I felt as though this presence had been waiting to interface with me and to reunite with me just as long or as much or more as I had been waiting for it. But I didn't know that this is what I had been waiting for.
I said, what is the meaning of life? And the being instantly put inside me somehow that it was love. And again, I never heard the word love. It wasn't Love. It was this sort of deep, comprehensive understanding that I remember, but I could never duplicate here. And I remember being so excited that my soul, my spirit, was doing like somersaults in the air. And I remember him laughing, chuckling. He just thought it was really funny. I don't know, but in a good-natured way. He wasn't laughing at me. He was laughing with me. He was feeling my joy. And I was feeling that connection to him.
Everything felt like love. I felt like love. And as I moved through space, it felt like I was expanding. And with the space, it was like I was becoming one with everything that I passed and expanded. It's like I was expanding by stuff versus simply passing by stuff, And when I passed something, I understood what it was.
And I somehow was able to absorb all this information. I understood what it all meant and that it was connected to me and that I was connected to it, and we were all interrelated. Again, it's not something I could ever explain to anybody here. It's hard enough for me to try to come to grips with what happened to me. So I understood things I could never understand here is all I'm trying to say.
And right then my soul rose above my body and I was in bright white light and there was a team of angels. And it was as if, like if you could imagine like being in an emergency room and there's all these people rushing in to save someone. That's what it was like. There were so many angels and they were working on me very, very fast, pulling things out, putting things in. But the light, it was super, so bright. And then I was in front of golden gates. They were open. And I was standing not on either side, but right in the middle. And God was there. And I was so close to God. It was as if the best way to describe it is if you could imagine going up to a mountain and you are so close to the mountain that you can't even see how massive and enormous and vast it is because you're just that close. That's how close I was to God. And everything is gold. It was gold and it was beautiful and wonderful. And God said to me, because I considered staying, and I'm looking, and God says, it's a mess down there. And I said, oh, I know, I have to go back and help people.
And I felt that light come again, that familiar light that came and embraced me in my grief. And it felt as if I was rising above the hospital bed. But this time the light, if you will, it dispensed. It lifted, and I found myself in the most beautiful place. People say heaven, they say the spirit world. There's all kinds of words. The only word that comes close to what I experienced is I was home. I was home. I was so welcomed. It was so familiar. I was so familiar. I was home, and I was so joyful. I began to run. Now, this is interesting because I don't run in this realm with the conditions of, my left leg is amputated. My right leg has 6 pins and a plate holding it together. My back is messed up. My hips are messed up. In this realm, I was running. And the odd thing is how physical it felt. I mean, I could feel the energy of the ground under my feet. I could feel the intelligence in my toes and my calves and my thighs. It was so invigorating. It's like my senses were just multiplied. And I was running, thinking, I'm home. I'm home. And again, I was delivered from the grief and the trauma. But I also got the message, you're not here to stay. And I had made that deal. I was going to go raise our son, and he had seen me in the hospital, and he'd been in and out of there. But my heart just broke for my son who had passed. And when I got this message or this knowing that I wasn't there to stay, immediately there was like this corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. I just knew. And so I did. I began working my way down this corridor. And as I did, at the end of the corridor was a crib. Now, my youngest son was only 14 months. He was just learning to walk and talk, and he was still sleeping in a crib. And so I rushed to that crib, and I looked in it, and there was my little boy. And he was perfect. He was beautiful. And I swept him up and held him in my arms. And I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child.
Oh, yes.
But there's a weight and a heat, about them. And I held him close to me. And again, it was so physical. He was solid. I could feel his breathing. I could feel his breath on my neck. I leaned over and I smelled his hair. It always triggers emotion because it's like, I don't know if you've ever smelled the hair of a loved one, but it's like, that's my boy and he's here and he's okay. And I began to weep. And as I was experiencing this, there was this profound presence behind me, this powerful, cosmic, overwhelming presence. And it kept moving closer and closer as I'm weeping, holding my little boy. And again, perhaps my upbringing, I thought, wow, that's God. It was so powerful. I thought, that's God. And the guilt began to bubble up. My little boy's here because I crashed the car. I lost control and cut his life short, and I'm weeping, holding my little boy, and I'm thinking I'm in so much trouble. And I'm feeling this presence come closer and closer. And I became fearful. And I had the thought, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. And it was with that thought that this presence came so close. And this felt physical too. I'm holding my little boy crying in this trauma of guilt. And I felt these divine arms just wrap around and hold me and my little boy. And that's when the lid just came off, if you will. There was this download of love and peace and comprehension. It was this, it's almost as if we became one, like my little boy became me and we became all there is. And the first thing that was communicated to me, and it wasn't necessarily with words, it was just flooding into me, is there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in pure divine order. Now, I still had my thoughts. I'm like, yeah, but how can that be? My little boy's here. And then I was shown my life. I've learned it's called the life review. I saw my life. I saw my parents' divorce. I saw the insecurities that created in me. I saw that even my aptitude in athletics was just a little boy insecure trying to prove that he was good enough or okay or whatever. I saw my brothers. I saw the accident. I saw so many things, even things that I was like, well, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And this beautiful being that held me said, there are no mistakes. What did you learn? And I was seeing my life in a complete different context. In fact, I saw things and I thought, well, that was wrong. And I know that was wrong. And I knew it was wrong then, and I did it anyway. And the being that held me said, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. You are as beloved as the little boy you hold. And that was the interesting thing of this experience. I mean, here I was holding my own son in the arms of God, and God saying, that's how we feel about you. I mean, you are as profound and beloved and perfect. And it was a very personal experience, but I also realized it rippled out to everyone, to every living soul. And I began to make some sense of what I was experiencing in the hospital. And there was so many things shared and communicated, and it was all very personal. One of the biggest things communicated, again, was choice. And life. I mean, I had grown up believing that life was a test and that God was going to judge me, and I was probably in trouble because I was failing the test. But in those arms and watching my life, suddenly the realization came that life is a gift. It's a profound, beautiful gift, and there was so much love. And our choices, I mean, and this sounds very strange, but as I was held, it was communicated to me, I want you to exercise your will. And I was like, what? I mean, it's your will be done. I've been taught that since I was a child. And God said to me, my will is your will. That's how much we love you. My will has always been that you have free will. That is my will. And I want you to make a choice. And it was communicated to me that I could be angry at God my whole life because of what happened, that the car crashed and half the family went. I was also told I could be angry with myself. I could beat myself up in guilt for the rest of my life. And all of this was in love. It was all like, look, you get to make the choice. But I was given a third choice. I was told, you can give your son to me. You can hand him over and trust and exercise your will, and that will be honored in the entire universe. I felt so, I don't know the word, I felt so important. I felt so beloved. It's like the whole universe was watching my silly life and my choice, but there was so much love and no judgment. And in all that beauty and all that peace, I was able to kiss my little boy and hand him over. I gave him back.
Thanks for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. Please add comments and questions you'd like future guests to answer. Also, if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. That'll help keep this podcast going. You can also go to Beyond with Heather Tesch to look for more episodes.